Alrighty, hey, welcome everybody. It's Wednesday. It's Friday. It's 4 p.m. Pacific.
It's not Wednesday.
It's time for Pathfinder Friday. Oh wow, sliding into the weekend. It's been a long day. It's not Wednesday. It is Friday. I promise you.
It's been a long week.
It has been a long week. Yes. And so we're glad you could make it today. We are going, yes, I am trying. We are going to do some recap today. We're going to be talking about the Mirrored Moon because we finished that last week. We are going to go ahead and do some talk about surveys. We're going to be going into the Mirrored Moon surveys. We're going to do the general survey responses, which has probably got some really interesting information in there. And then we've got an update on the resonance testing that we're going to be doing. And to get all of that done, to meet that agenda that we've set up for ourselves today, we have in the studio Mr. Mark Seifter. Mark Seifter,
hey,
everybody.
Everybody.
Welcome. Yes. Mark, thanks for being here again. It's like the Mark and Dan show lately.
Yeah, well, I think it works.
I do too. I think it's good. So you ran through the Mirrored Moon last week and the week before.
That's right.
We finished that up, and we, instead of going through and doing the survey results and everything, we decided to wait another week to give folks a chance to put their results in and all of that.
Yeah, people are falling a little bit behind our ruling schedule. It just gives people more time to do it and get their surveys in.
Yeah,
and now
absolutely.
we have more results than we did before.
So then, and that's okay if they're falling behind.
Yeah.
Surveys,
you don't fall off the map. It's open until the end of the year. Until
the end of the year, those surveys are going to be open. So keep that in mind. We want your feedback, even if you're falling behind just a little bit. So, let's get into some of the survey results, because at the end of every chapter, anyone that's played it, anyone that's run the game, all of that sort of thing, we want them to answer the surveys, give us their feedback, tell us about their experiences, and we like to do Deconstructing Doomsday Dawn, which is the little thing we're doing right now, which kind of goes back through some of that data. We kind of pull it out, find the interesting stuff, find the useful stuff, and compress that for all of you folks to hear. So Mark, what do you got for us as far as the surveys?
All right, well, obviously spoilers abound at this point.
Good
for
thinking.
Part 4.
Good thinking.
So in Part 4, you have 2 months to explore a wide area and get some clues, get some allies, get some treasure, and then attack a base of enemies.
Right.
And as we saw in our stream, it took about 1 month and change for our group to do that, and they were pretty thorough.
Yes.
That's turned out with the surveys to be fairly consistent with what other people have done. Most groups are taking a little bit under 1 month to complete the adventure.
Okay.
But they're that because the average includes some groups that were not going to have been as thorough and gone to as many places as our group. Our group could have finished it super fast after beating the dragon if they had thought to check right near where they were. The final hex was there, and they had enough stuff that they probably could have won if they just did it then. But
so close.
It's much more fun with going to the other areas and having more to play out.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So that average is not too surprising. Also, this was our Nova test, our test of 1 encounter per day. Mm-hmm. So super unsurprising, but very few groups ran out of resonance or spells or anything like that when they only had 1 fight.
Yeah, that's fair, yeah.
One thing that was kind of surprising is that there were a lot fewer times that people fell unconscious during this one.
What do we attribute to that?
Fewer. Well, I'm not exactly sure why a lot fewer people fell unconscious, but a little bit more people died, and I know what to attribute to that.
Okay.
So they usually didn't fall unconscious, but if they did, they were much more likely to die, and what you attribute to that is sea serpent.
Oh yeah, that serpent.
Yeah, the sea serpent had a spine rake ability that probably, almost certainly, should have been a 2-action ability that was listed at 1 action, so it could do it 3 times per round instead of once.
Right, and we didn't have that encounter, did we?
They did not fight that. They decided, let's not fight the sea serpent.
Which is an admirable choice.
Yeah, well, they rolled some knowledges. They're like, no.
Not worth it.
And so we didn't do that one, but that was consistently rated at such an extreme level of difficulty by everyone who actually fought that sea serpent that it's like one of the highest average difficulty ratings that any of these, which we've consistently asked, how would you rate the difficulty of this particular encounter? And turns out the sea serpent was like pretty much all very challenging or extremely challenging.
There was a lot of write-ins of people wanting to select the next one higher that wasn't even a choice. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, they wanted to write in.
The next
15.
one after that was NA, which means they didn't fight it. So I hope they didn't do that.
Choice. Yeah, deciding not to swim out into the lake is definitely a smart idea.
Yeah.
So
I'm with our group on that. So we had that, which was kind of interesting.
That is interesting.
You know, you hear that Pathfinder players are murder hobos. In a lot of places, it's sort of a meme. But turns out, our players are not murder hobos.
Really?
Yes. In fact, even when presented with a fairly adversarial type of monster, a Cyclops, that's usually seen as an enemy giant, in all of the encounters where there was an option, except the rocks, which some groups couldn't even communicate with because they're animals.
They're animals.
Like 80% of groups, pretty consistently, close to 80% of groups use the diplomatic route.
What? Really? That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of you. Look at you guys. It's almost like, because, you know, a lot of people already know this. I'm Team Rogue all the way. Love to play the Rogue.
Yeah.
A lot of times I don't have a choice as a Rogue. I have to be diplomatic. I have to try to talk my way out of things. It's like I suddenly fit in. I'm not a murder hobo. I'm a talker. And it's nice to know 80% of the people were diplomatic on that.
And even in a fight that is a forced fight, the one with the dragon and the giant mercenary, 50% of groups actually spared the giant mercenary and recruited him to fight for them and thought to do that, which our group did on the stream. But I didn't expect that many people to think of that. I thought they would just be like, they would kill the giant.
Yeah.
Especially since you have to go to some trouble to be sure that you take someone alive.
Yeah.
Even, right?
It's
and
not
our group
easy.
kept asking him to stand down, and the giant he eventually did.
Yeah, yeah.
But to have 50%
really cool.
of groups do that, that shows that means more than 50% were thinking about it, but they might not have always managed to take him alive.
Yeah.
So I think that was a pretty interesting.
That is really, really interesting. So what do we do? Is there anything we can do with that information? What do we think about that?
It lets us know a little bit more about the way that some of the people play the game. And interestingly, that 80% doesn't change that much, even if you cross-reference for all sorts of fun little things you can
like
cross-reference for.
classes and group makeup and all of
Like,
that sort of
you
thing.
could even cross-reference for, like, how about the people who love the game the most? Are they more likely beer and pretzels people who are fighting? Nope, they're actually still around. I mean, it's not exactly the same because these are smaller groups. Like, people who are rating, like, the game with 5 stars at the end. Yeah, they still did it that much. What about people who are like, no, I don't like the game? They still... they still are role playing about 80%.
Yeah.
So,
was there any kind of incentive for the GM to put it in a certain way where it's like it's better if you?
We didn't. I mean, we told them at the beginning.
Yeah.
Kaleri says time to get some allies, but that doesn't mean that Cyclops are allies. Especially the Fae even send you to go after the Cyclops to stop them.
Right.
And you have to roll and succeed at a diplomacy check to prevent a fight with the Cyclops.
Yeah. Yeah.
It also shows us that our skill DC for the diplomacy check, wasn't too bad because 80% of groups use diplomacy successfully on the Cyclops. That means that's how many wanted to and succeeded at their check.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with King of Rock in the chat saying it's also really good design just to have that option. It's not on a rail. You don't have to go here, kill that thing, go here, kill that thing. It's like, you can make friends with it. If you can, you can. And I like that kind of stuff. So.
And speaking of gathering allies.
Let's speak about gathering allies.
Well, a huge percentage of groups that made it to the end with the Knight Heralds had the maximum category of ally points. Now that's by design. We may have noticed that our Thursday group had over twice as many ally points as they actually needed to have the maximum category. We mainly made it pretty easy to get the maximum category of ally points due to the fact that that's the fight we wanted to have as the finale fight, unless you really made some mistakes. That's why the one with 0 ally points is like, this is virtually impossible.
Yeah, absolutely.
The max category of 4 is just easy to hit.
And that was what the max was.
Yeah, you only needed 4, so that was easy to get.
So then, moving along into what else we might have learned from the surveys for the Chapter 4?
I think those are some of the key takeaway points from Chapter 4, but there is so much on those general surveys. And all of you guys who've been taking them, you know those general surveys are long.
Yeah, and
I really appreciate how much time you guys have all put into answering those general surveys.
Right, yeah, and just to make sure, in case you're not familiar, the general surveys are the ones that are not connected to a chapter. They're not necessarily, they're more open feedback type of idea, where it's like, hey, if you just have stuff to say, that sort of thing.
Right. I'm calling them general rather than open because there's also the open response surveys, which
it's different. It's different.
Are different.
Yes,
where that's
fair.
just where we give you a space to just say whatever you want, and some of those are attached to the Doomsday Dawn chapters. But
Fair.
The general surveys are classes, they're ancestries. There's even a general survey that's general rules. That's on the rules. There's one on monsters. And there is some fascinating data in those surveys, and some things that I just wouldn't have expected. Often things are way more positive than I expected in some categories.
Okay.
But before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about this because some people have mentioned it on the message boards. They're like, well, how is it even possible that these surveys have so many really positive responses in them, and the message boards and a lot of places online have so many negative responses?
Yeah.
Is it bad data in one of those two places? Are we getting a different sample set of people? The answer is, the third possibility is, are people like trying to skew things one way or the other? Are people on the message boards like over exaggerating? No, actually none of those is the case. Really what's happening is when we ask you 200 questions on the general rules surveys and you're like in favor of 180 of those. But you wouldn't go post on the message board. You wouldn't think of that topic.
Yeah.
Like if one of the things was that we asked you about whether or not we thought it was easy to understand a certain terminology, or whether or not you thought that the idea of trinkets fit into the world, or trinkets, for example, everything on them except their power level and how many of them there are for options rated well. Those two didn't. And when I say that the general surveys are good, that doesn't mean everybody likes everything. There's some things that rated poorly, like, for instance, resonance, or some of the things on the ancestries that got us to do the updates. We often made updates for the things that flat out rated poorly. But even if everything did rate well, if a really good rating, 80 to 90% of people being in favor of it, that still means 10 to 20% of people didn't like it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes they really didn't like it. And if you're in that 10 to 20% who didn't like it, you're much more likely to come online and tell us about that and how that was going to be a problem for you. Whereas there are 200 different things. You're not going to start a thread about each of those 200 things that you were in the 80 to 90%. So, for example, in the classes survey, some of you guys will know about this if you've taken the classes survey. Each class had a few sort of like questions about different changes we made that were specific to those classes.
Okay.
And those changes on those questions generally had a between 66 and 90% approval rating towards our change. Sometimes we gave multiple options, which was like, here's the change we made for this game, here's the PF1, here's some other ones, and still had 90% on the one that we made in the playtest.
Okay.
And I was not expecting that. Like, for example, Druids being a primal spellcaster has over a 90% approval rating.
So then, does this mean that, let's just say I'm one of those people that is not happy with that, right? And if we're hearing, the general idea is that, overwhelmingly, everybody likes this thing. The approval rating is high. If I don't like that, do I have any recourse at all? Am I just kind of out of luck on this, or how does this evolve?
I mean, we're not going to design things based purely on looking at the surveys. For one thing, there are a lot of things we could survey that would definitely, like, if we ask people questions about things that make their characters more powerful, they're much more likely to say that they want that thing on a survey. Right. But we can't always give things that go all the way up. If you see what I mean.
Yeah,
and if it's 90%, I don't want to say you're out of luck completely, but kind of 90% is really high. Unless there was another... If you're in the 10%, you find a fatal flaw. It's not just for your game, but which as always, I hugely encourage people to house rule once the playtest is over. I do it all the time.
Yeah.
House rule back to what you prefer, but not just for your game, but it's like, no, this is seriously a problem. Even though 90% of the people like it, it's gonna cause issues. And you present that, we'll take that into account. So there's certainly things that have fairly high approval, maybe not 90%, that still have their own problems that we're still gonna fix.
Right.
So that's not the be-all, end-all. It just was interesting to me that 90% of people liked Primal rather than Divine for Druids. Or here's another fun one. I really didn't know how people would react to the Sorcerer and Bard changes. When I came up with them, I wasn't even sure they'd make them out of the office because I thought some people would be not like them. But the Sorcerer change and the Bard change are both hugely popular. They have like 70 to 80%.
It's significant.
And the Bard gave you the option of 9th level Occult, which is what we did in the playtest, or 9th level Arcane, or 6th level Occult, or 6th level Arcane, or Other.
Right.
So it had 5, and a huge number of people picked 9th level Occult. The next highest after that, which also surprised me, but maybe shouldn't have, was 6th level Arcane, the same as it was in Pathfinder First Edition. I thought more people would go for 9th level Arcane because it gave them more spells.
Yeah.
But and then there is another factor of this too, which is that you can be in the 10% for Druids, say, and be like, oh, well, that's only one thing. But you can be in a situation where it looks very dire for you because you could be in the 10% for all of them.
For all of it, yes, exactly.
And I actually did some analysis of those where I sort of said, well, let's assume you're one of the few people who was in one of these categories.
Right.
And those people were much more likely to have just gone with keep everything the same as PF1 down the line. They were if you're in the 10% for one, you might be in the 10% for a lot.
And and I do think that there is a bit of that, for I know for me, and just speaking for myself, there is a lot of don't change that, don't change this, But after a while, after looking at it and playing it more and more, like I have, you start to realize that these are all cohesive. They all have to, if you're gonna do this and actually change the things to make it more updated. And get new things to play with, then a lot of this does need to kind of change. I know for me, I felt like right around Unchained, I guess it was, or something, where it was like, wow, they're adding a lot of new house rule stuff. Like they're adding a lot of stuff, and that's when I started thinking, how long can this go? I think that it's adding a lot of books that add a lot of extra stuff.
So you're saying right around when Unchained came out is when there was just the hardcovers had a little bit too much for you? I
think that's where I started really wondering, what are the purpose of these hardcovers now? At this point.
Oh, that's my first hardcover. I was on all of them starting with Unchained.
And believe me, I took that Unchained Rogue like no one's business. I loved that thing. It was so awesome. But I started to wonder, though, that's when I started thinking, what are the purpose of these books now? Because it's really altering a lot of stuff about the game. The potential is here to change a lot of stuff. So, I don't know. It was just something that popped into my cabeza when I was playing the game. So,
and people probably aren't going to be surprised that things like the action economy had a over 90% approval.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I was not surprised by that. Something interesting is there was a question in the Monsters survey, for all of you who've taken it, that asked about specific monster changes where we changed demons to have weaknesses based on their sin rather than the standard D&D based immunities and resistances, and there's just somewhere around 20 of those.
Right.
The approval on those, and we asked people to rate how much they liked or agreed with those on a 5-point scale, is extremely high as an aggregate group.
Nice.
The least approved of all of those was devils being resistant rather than immune to poison, but I want to be clear that when I say the least approved of all of those, I mean it had a high approval rating, not a sky-high approval rating.
Right.
Many of them had. So we said, do you extremely think this is extremely true, that you really, really like this? Very, very, extremely positive, very somewhat not
strongly
so.
Agree.
And not at all. No, this is awful.
Right.
And many of them had an average that was somewhere between halfway between very good and extremely good.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty nice because a lot of those weird changes were things that like Logan and I were bouncing back and forth and being like, do you think people would like it if we did this weird thing, or is this too radical a departure?
Yeah.
And it seems like overall people like that. Another fun one, because it's a big split in our office, because it's a big split among the designers, is diagonal movement.
Yeah, yeah.
And over 2/3 of people like the PF1 and playtest version of diagonal movement, because it's like it's complicated and you have to do weird counting stuff versus for the current one, versus the 1-to-1 diagonals causes you to like warp at a 1.5 speed along diagonal trails, and you just outpace everybody else in a weird way. Yeah. And it for such a small thing, it can be something that people care about a lot. So it's pretty funny.
And that makes sense. I think that overall the little changes that are coming in, and I think with hearing these good remarks and saying, the approval rating is very high on this change and this proposed change and all of that sort of thing. It's encouraging, I would imagine. It's encouraging. It's
certainly more encouraging than really the way internet exposure really ever is in a playtest. Like, message boards are actually very useful. There have been a lot of great ideas on the message boards, amazing in-depth analyses that have helped us so much. But as an aggregate, they are the place to find all the things that people who don't like it don't like, which you need that. But as I explained earlier on, you're not going to come on and post 100, and if we have 200 questions, right. You're not going to post 190 threads about the ones you did like. You'll post about the 10 you didn't, even if I was taking 10 out of 200 as a 5%, if 5% of the things you don't like. So as a way to look at like sort of a feeling, you can get kind of a malaise or a negative feeling from any of these playtests I've sort of participated in as a designer or even as a player through the years before I was signed up. And that's not to say that I think the playtesters are like being negative or trying to be nasty. That's just they're trying to do the best they can to show us what's wrong, what we need to change, and we're changing it. But that's how those wind up feeling. Yeah. And the surveys can feel like a breath of fresh air because of the fact that we get to see, oh yeah, no, there are serious problems. We need to fix those problems. The surveys also show us that they're the biggest areas of problems. But there's also actually a lot of things that aren't just things we kept and people like that we kept, but things that we chose to change that people like that we changed.
Right.
And so I think that's helpful to us from the morale perspective of,
absolutely.
It's like, did anyone like anything we changed? The answer is people like most of the changes, but the things they don't like could be a deal breaker for them, and we need to figure it out.
Yeah, and that's where the data comes from. It's
absolutely.
Like, let's figure out where those like hard stops are, where it's like, nope, that's a roadblock, and these surveys help that. The what do we call them? The general surveys.
Yeah.
Those are how many questions roughly? They're
some of them are very long, and there's more to come that we need to do yet, and I'm not sure when we'll be able to get those out. The timing of this resonance test that we're about to talk about being on an in-between updates week has really pushed us to the limits. Because usually it's already hard enough to do these big updates on a 2-week cycle, but having the in-between week have a resonance test, whew.
Yeah. Can you, do you have to do them all in one go? Can you save it and come back to it?
You can, it will automatically save your progress as long as you completed a page and hit next.
Right. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
Then you can come back, and even if you aren't really done the page, you can go back and hit back. But as long as you hit a button to indicate that you're done with that page, it will have saved everything up to that point. You can go back, you can change it. If your opinion changes, you can change it that at any time.
But it's browser based. It's on the computer you took it on.
Your IP and your cookie.
Okay, so make sure you got it. You're using the same computer. You should be fine.
Yeah, you should be okay.
Perfect.
To go back, make changes. So it's like, whoa, I played the Alchemist now. I'm gonna go and talk about the Alchemist. And we definitely got some interesting feedback about the different classes in addition to those questions. Like, we got to see what people thought were the most powerful classes in the game. It's Cleric, then Fighter, Then a lot of them are close to each other, although you tend to see a lot of spellcasters and barbarian being pretty high up.
Right.
And then there's a gap with alchemist and ranger.
Okay.
Although a lot of that ranger data was from before we made some adjustments that helped the ranger out and the alchemist out. We're not done helping them out, of course, but... And then there's which ones were the most interesting classes. And that one's actually a less interesting question because it turns out the answer is all of the spellcasters except for wizard are all just at the top of that list, and then alchemist, and then the martial characters with wizard mixed in. So
right. All right. Well,
so I think that's pretty good for the surveys for now.
Yeah. Mark, thanks for joining us, buddy. It's been a lot of fun.
Good to have you, Dan.
Thank you to everybody out there for joining us. We've been wrapping up Chapter 4 to Doomsday Dawn, the Mirrored Moon. We've gone over the survey data, and we've kind of looked at some of the things that we're learning from all of you from playing the game, and it's been a lot of fun. Until next time, we'll see you then. In the meantime, feel free to hit me up on Twitter and let me know what you would like to see in the show. I'm more than happy to listen. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to hit subscribe and hit the bell and all of that sort of thing. So that way you can know whenever we're updating stuff. I upload videos about 4 times a week now, and following along with that helps let you know when we do that. In the meantime, for Mark Seifter over here, and for me, your old pal Dan, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye!
Bye, everybody.
Big camera, there it is. See ya!